Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 24th of October 2023. I'm a little bit worse for wear today. It's a crazy couple of days, and why I'm telling you this is because it will affect my scheduling and also possibly the content. So I got a crazy day today. I've got to shoot down to Bath later to watch my favourite band in concert, and that's been rescheduled, and so will I be able to get my content out? And also had a games night around mine that was absolutely epic last night, and that's why I feel like rough as a badger's arse. And so I haven't maybe curated as much content as I would like, but we'll see. We'll start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Just before I go there, I just want to dip into a Rob Lee couple of tweets here where he said GUI's Andrei Yusov says that Russia has more than 400,000 soldiers in Ukraine, and then he draws on a comment he made back in August, right, at the end of August. He said, I think people have generally underestimated how much of Ukraine's force has been committed and overestimated how much of Russia's force has been committed the past 3 months. In other words, Ukraine are probably using more reserves and are committing more of their forces than we really understand. And Russia probably has more to draw from than we give them credit for. And I've often talked about how their reserves have been exhausted. They're using their reserves, which they are. But I guess the idea is, if they are consistently crypto mobilizing, and if they have conscription that filters troops through, how many troops end up being fed into the war zone over time, every month? Are they able to replenish their reserves in a way that means that they have this constant feed of new boots on the ground? Meat to the meat grinder. So 810 personnel being lost yesterday is still the high end of the range that we've seen over the last 3 months. Really significant losses. How many of those are replenishable? 12 tanks and 16 armoured personnel vehicles are really heavy losses. Again, not the highest that we've seen, but you can't lose 12 tanks a day and get away with it. I would argue, although we can, as ever, debate how accurate these figures are, but even if you took that down to, 8 tanks lost yesterday, that's still a really large number of tanks. 16 APVs, as I say, 24 artillery systems, not the highest, but that is a significant loss again. 3 multiple launch rocket systems, well above the average across the war. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. 18 drones and 1 cruise missile. That's not from last night, that's the night before. 28 vehicles and fuel tanks is a fairly heavy loss, and 8 pieces of special equipment is significant. Right, so those numbers are, again, bad for Russia and their attrition rates. If we look at Andrew Perpetua, the mapper that I refer to an awful lot, he tots up the figures on a daily basis that he comes across, and the ratios are looking like 4 to 5, maybe 4 or 5 to 1 here for Russian to Ukrainian losses. Let's look at the value of these losses, the type of equipment that we see. The Russians losing, engineering vehicles, surveillance and comm, couple of bits of artillery. Is often not, if any category doesn't quite track with the Ukrainian general staff figures, it's the artillery losses, and I think that's because there will be an awful lot that won't be filmed. There'll be counter battery fire. It's just, I guess, once you've posted 5 D20s being blown up, then what's the point of posting another 5? So for a whole load of reasons that I talked about before, I don't think you see as many pieces of evidence of this. Whereas when you're looking at things like Avdiivka being attacked, and you see these columns of vehicles and you've got drones looking at them from 3 different angles, it's a lot easier to track those kind of losses. So given what's been going on in Avdiivka, we have a high number of IFVs and tanks again. I mean, goodness me, these tanks are are being attrited at incredible rates. And then trucks and civilian trucks and so on that you see from first-person view drone footage, as you can see from the cause, what Andrew Perpetua puts down as the cause of them being blown up here, first-person view drones across almost all of those civilian vehicles and military trucks. There is an ATGM taking out a Ural truck and shelling for a Kamaz, but generally it's first-person view drones. So that you often get a lot of footage from first-person view drones, and a lot of it gets posted, particularly in montage videos. If you look at the Ukrainian losses, some bits of artillery, a couple of tanks, T-64s, so older tanks, MTLB, an older armoured personnel carrier, and a Brem 1 engineering or recovery vehicle, so that's going to be fairly significant. But I think, again, this is Russia taking a heavy hit compared to Ukraine, certainly as evidenced from footage on social media. Dmitry from War Translated says, very reservedly, the Russians confirmed the takedown of their own Mi-8, which I reported yesterday. It's just, do we have the evidence for that? Yep, lots of Russians are now admitting this, which resulted in the death of 3 pilots over the sea. A brief note without mentioning the names, appearing on Kirill Fyodorov's channel, where the fundraiser was also launched. It is still unclear where and when this happened, but we have, as you can see from that tweet, the people who were on board. So that, this is evidence that definitely, that almost certainly happened. According to Russian sources, the entire Mi-8 crew was killed by our air defense as a result of erroneous launch and fell into the sea. That's the quote from a Russian source. So they've lost quite a high number of their airframes to their own air defenses over the course of the war, to be honest. Here we have Tatarigami doing some visual imagery analysis of the losses around Avdiivka, and I'm going to drop into this because I think it's a useful thread. So I know we talked a lot about the Avdiivka losses. They are still continuing. Through visual analysis of satellite imagery, our team found Russian military losses in Avdiivka between October the 10th and 20th. So this is only 10 days. It's been going on another 4 days, remember. The total number exceeded 109, indicating a loss of approximately aligning to a brigade-sized force in just 10 days. So the actual count of destroyed vehicles is notably higher. We excluded about a dozen vehicles with low to medium confidence due to inconsistent imagery coverage. In some cases, it was impossible to determine if a vehicle had remained in place for a while or was in motion. All new lost vehicles are indicated by a red square on the imagery, while old losses that were already present at the end of September are marked with a white square. The overwhelming majority of losses were primarily armoured fighting vehicles, including BMP-1 and BMP-2 of various configurations, T-72, T-64 and T-80 tanks in different variations, and MTLB, BTRs and transport vehicles. In total, these losses amount to 109 vehicles. The operation scale and the involvement of multiple brigades strongly indicate that it is being conducted at the army level. We also see some evidence about additional reinforcements being deployed to the Avdiivka area, but further details cannot be disclosed at this time. Despite reports of old equipment use, our team identified a significant presence of modern vehicles and equipment in coordinated battalion level assaults, further underscoring the operation's importance for Russian command. I think this is a really significant point that Tatarigami makes here. I think this indicates that they have been planning for this as a serious thing for a long time. So there's been talk about them stockpiling equipment and ammunition since winter for this attack. So that's last winter. It's a long time to get ready for this. And the idea and the fact that there is modern equipment in this, like they're using some of their best equipment to do this attack, means that this was a really high value operation. As you would imagine, if you're going to throw that much stuff into it, you're going to be really wanting this to succeed, and you'll go, although not enough to do things cleverly, unfortunately for the Russians, but it just shows you that this was an important operation. Upon analysing the initial phase, our team concluded it was long planned, not a reactionary operation, exactly what I was just saying. The observed patterns suggest Russians invested substantial time and resources, expecting significant losses to achieve their objective. Despite large losses, the enemy persisted in employing more mechanized forces to develop the limited success they had achieved, with the aim of securing dominant positions, disrupting logistics, and controlling waste heaps. The Russian vehicle losses have surpassed those incurred during the Seversky Donetsk crossing. That's where they lost around 100 vehicles in 2022. It's likely that these losses have already exceeded or will surpass the vehicle losses sustained by the Russians in the Vuhledar area between November 2022 and April 2023. Again, losing well over 100 there, the Russians. Two independent sources on the ground estimate Russian vehicle losses at around 200. So again, when the analyses like these are done, it's the benchmark minimum, right? We got 109, we've discounted 12 that are probable, so you're talking about 120 odd, but that's like what we definitely know. There will be an awful lot of equipment that just hasn't been caught, that we don't know about, etc., etc. And estimations are that some 200 have been lost. Our current assessment is primarily focused on geospatial evidence, hence we have chosen not to include this number, as we currently lack supporting satellite imagery for it. However, the situation is far from stable. Russian forces continue to extensively use guided air-dropped bombs and artillery strikes, along with deploying LMUR, the light multi-purpose guided rockets. So these are rockets sent from helicopters that have about a 15-kilometer range. Multiple indicators point to active efforts to sustain the operation. In conclusion, we want to emphasize several key points. This army-level operation, conducted through battalion or battalion tactical group, signifies not only the gravity of the operation, but also shows an attempt to shift the strategic initiative to the Russian side. The sustainability of these losses is in question, although this approach mirrors what we've observed in previous battles like Mariupol, Vuhledar, and Bakhmut, when the Russians committed significant human and material resources and were willing to accept enormous losses. The operation originally aimed for a faster outcome than the advancement of Avdiivka through its flanks, but the resistance and skills exhibited by Ukrainian defenders have proven to be far more formidable than the Russians had anticipated in their plans. And you can go and check further details at frontlineintelligence.substack.com for their work there. I mentioned a Zoopark $10 million piece of kit that was taken out yesterday. There's now evidence for that being blown up. Here's Anton Gershchenko saying Russian Zoopark 1 complex was destroyed in Donetsk direction by the Ukrainian Special Forces operations. Zoopark 1 is a radar complex for reconnaissance and fire control, counter-battery radar. It's intended for reconnaissance of the position of firepower, calculation of projectile and missile trajectories, monitoring of airspace, and control of drones. It was reportedly worth over $10 million. So this is classic counter-battery. You map the trajectory of the munition, of the shell, and that allows you to know exactly where it's fired from, and then you tell your artillery batteries or artillery team what the coordinates are, and then hit that. But of course, the Russians have been complaining on multiple occasions in multiple places of a lack of counter-battery fire. Right, moving on to strikes, distance strikes. Ukrainian forces have positioned across Mykolaiv, Vinnytsia, and Khmelnytsky Oblast, thwarted a Russian air assault, successfully destroying 6 one-way attack drones, Shahed drones, in a nighttime operation in the early hours of last night. So there were 6 sent across. All 6 were intercepted. It's not a huge number of drones, and probably as a result of only being a few drones, indicates trying to sound out Ukrainian air defense positions. Okay, Last night, Russians shelled the village of Borova of the Izium district. So this is up in the northern sector on the Oskil River, and shows that I think they're still aiming for Borova, but I don't think that's doable particularly, as we talked about before. But we'll talk about this in the Frontline update later. The two-story apartment building was damaged. 4 people were injured. And yes, so that kind of stuff is going on commonly. A lot of shelling up and down the front line. Marnets and Nikopol down the south again on the northern shore of the Zaporizhia reservoir, as was, I think, were targeted again. Now, explosions were reported in Rostov in Russia, so air defense there being active indicates that the Ukrainians are still sending stuff into Russia. We don't often hear or see the details of these strikes and how successful they are, whether they're successful, at all. But hopefully some news will come out about this. At night, Ukrainian drones attacked the Russian fleet in Sevastopol. So the results are still unknown, and also explosions in Makivka and Donetsk up in the occupied eastern and northern sectors there. So Russian proxies are being reporting explosions in Sevastopol. Several Telegram channels reporting that. The later Mikhail Razvojaev, the head of Sevastopol's illegal Russian occupation government, claimed that the Black Sea Fleet repels a possible attack by enemy submarine sabotage forces. So perhaps there are some submarines left in Sevastopol, and well, no, actually, these are enemy submarine. So these will be underwater drones that they are having a pop at. So yeah, I don't know any of the details there. Might be interesting to keep an eye on that one and see what comes out throughout the day. Tim White says Ukraine's advisor to Mariupol points out that that Russia docked a huge bulk carrier in the occupied city for the first time. With nothing new produced there, it must be carrying things. What exactly is not difficult to guess. Definitely not houses for the people of Mariupol. This is yes. I wonder if this is connected at all to stuff coming from South Korea. I mean, if it's docking in... Well, you've got two options. So I don't know where this ship has come from, but if it's come through the Bosphorus Straits, is this a case of pretending they're delivering stuff that's not to do with the war? Warships can't go through there, but if they can get through ships like this that deliver, military equipment, then it's functionally the same. Or is it delivering from a port in the Black Sea to Sevastopol? So just from Russia in the Black Sea to occupied Crimea, delivering military equipment. I don't know, but anyway, people are keeping an eye on this. As Flash News says, Russian bulk carrier entered the port of temporarily occupied Mariupol for the first time. The full load of the ship is much more than 5,000 tons. It's reported by Petro Andriushchenko, advisor to the mayor of Mariupol. Quote, considering the fact that there was nothing to load in Mariupol with such a weight, delivery to Mariupol and unloading is the goal. What exactly? It is not difficult to guess. Definitely not houses, as mentioned earlier. So, okay. It makes no sense to destroy the Crimean bridge to raise the mood. When it is necessary to make Crimea an island, it will definitely be done. We should wait for the appropriate moment, the spokesman for the naval forces, Dmytro Pletenchuk, has said. This is interesting and falls in line with what I've said previously, which is I think they would not want to blow up the Crimean bridge until they're ready to do so. That it might well offer an off-ramp for Russians in Crimea. Some people say they should hit the railway bridge and concentrate on that being non-functional and leave the road bridge, because it's less important for military transport and logistics. And already the road bridge can't take, I think, the heaviest of loads due to it being hit previously, and those are still transported by ferry. Things like fuel, I believe, and heavy loads. So this is, I guess, explicitly expressing this idea that they could hit it now. The reason it hasn't been hit is because it's not in their best interest, in the Ukraine's best interest to do so right now. Washington Post reports that Ukraine conducts high-value assassinations inside Russia. This is, of course, something we already knew. Let's pop into this, and this will be about, amongst others, Daria Dugin, who... Okay, let's go to what the Kiev Independent says of this. Washington Post reported, citing undisclosed official sources, that Ukraine's security service, the SBU, was allegedly behind dozens of assassinations against Russian targets since February 2022. This is completely unsurprising, but just gives a kind of formality to the claims. The news outlet writes that the security services operations, including the killing of Russian Navy officer Stanislav Rzhitsky in Krasnodar. So that was a chap who was shot jogging in Krasnodar, which is Russia, and he was one of the commanders. Was he a submarine commander responsible for the release of cruise missiles against Ukraine? So that's a real high-value target. Well, I mean, these people aren't going to be killed, just by randoms. So it's pretty obvious that the security service is behind it. Anyway, news. Yes, so that's him, and the bombing in a St. Petersburg cafe that killed Russian military blogger Vladlen Tatarsky. Now, this was, if you remember, I reported on this quite a lot. This was a chap that was blown up by receiving a statue that had explosives inside it. He's a really prominent mill blogger, but actually there's quite a bit of reaction to this, saying, they shouldn't be going for kind of lower value targets like that. And yeah, there is a bit of pushback to some of the targeting, where you could argue that actually the information space is so important that some of these targets do have higher value than people might give them credit for. Ukraine reportedly attempted to strike at Gerasimov when he was visiting Russian troops in April, while senior high-ranking officers were said to have been killed in the attack. Gerasimov escaped with his life. So there are things that happen that we don't particularly know. One of the huge ones was the ultra-nationalist and philosopher Alexander Dugin, who's kind of like the mastermind behind Putin's thinking. He was targeted. I mean, I would say this is, you might think, he's just a thinker or whatever, but he is kind of the theory behind the action. And so I'd say he was a high value target. And what happened is he swapped cars with his daughter, and his daughter ended up dying. So it would have killed him had they not swapped cars, one would assume. Anyway, the SBU's lethal operations have reportedly caused friction with the US partners who have been providing Ukraine's special services, both the SBU and military intelligence, the HUR, with training and advanced equipment for years, the Washington Post's sources said. The officials stressed that the US intelligence had no involvement in the assassinations carried out by Ukrainian agencies, and that their cooperation focused mainly on developing skills in gathering intelligence. Quote, "We never involved our international partners in covert operations, especially behind the front lines," a former senior Ukrainian security official reportedly said. The US Chief Intelligence Agency, the CIA, has several times voiced objections to Ukraine's lethal operations, but has not withdrawn its support for its Ukrainian partners, the officials told the Washington Post. Quote, "All targets hit by the SBU are completely legal," the security services head Vasil Malyuk told the Washington Post, without referring to any concrete cases. He nevertheless added that Ukraine, quote, "does everything to ensure that fair punishment will catch up with all traitors, war criminals, and collaborators." I did a segment on assassinations, the moral implications thereof, and Ukraine's use of them in a previous video. Here is, again, going back to Avdiivka in our bits and pieces here. Avdiivka is turning into... it's looking like becoming another Bakhmut, isn't it? Bakhmut 2.0. Let's try and just give you an indication of Bakhmut here. The destruction of the town. And yet there will still be people living there in the basements, incredibly. Very much a sort of Bakhmut 2.0, isn't it? And of course, if Russia did encircle it and then get in there, it'll be fighting building to building, and would be a real tough slog for the Russians. Now, speaking of Gerasimov, as it just was, Darren Masako here, who's well worth listening to. She's a senior fellow at Carnegie Russia, adjunct at the RAND Corporation, focusing on defense issues in Russia. She says it appears that the Russians may be losing multiple brigade elements from its second combined arms army and Donetsk People's Republic forces in their assault on Avdiivka. Gerasimov strikes again, this time with no pushback on his bad ideas so far, yet there are some troubling issues to consider. If you followed me for a while, you know that I don't give Gerasimov's command in this war high marks, to say the least. He and Shoigu have personality conflicts with their subordinates when presumably they were advocating for different ways forward, more appropriate to the damaged status of the Russian army, like assuming defensive postures or relieving forces on time. But Shoigu and Gerasimov are loyal to the end, and so they... Oops, sorry, that was a click to a New York Times article. They are loyal to the end, and so they are kept in their jobs regardless of their command deficiencies. This is something I said before. They're actually low quality but very loyal people, which means Putin will keep them around. Anyone who's of high quality is a threat to Putin and gets moved on or killed. So now the Russians have launched another localized offensive and are losing elements of 3 brigades from the 2nd Combined Arms Army, Central Military District, the DNR, and possibly one from the 41st Combined Arms Army near Avdiivka, if this account is accurate. And she refers to one I shared with you yesterday from Dmitry from War Translated, who gives Butasov, the journalist, account of what's going on there. Russian forces have lost over 100 vehicles in their attempts in the last 2 weeks. Their assaults are straining Ukrainian forces in the area, but the Ukrainians are holding. Gerasimov prefers to go on the offensive because that's what he thinks is needed and or what his boss wants. I believe this is a factor for why Surovikin was demoted, who was at the time taking a different defensive approach and constructed multiple defense belts. Within weeks of Gerasimov taking over in February, the Russians launched an offensive that fizzled out then. Prigozhin is dead, Surovikin is exited or suspended indefinitely. Who else remains who could push back on Gerasimov's bad ideas now? Handpicked Alexei Kim won't be the one to push back on Gerasimov. And then... Rudskoy, who's this guy below left, and the Rostov crew below right, that's this lot, won't be the ones either. Teplinsky keeps a low profile or goes to the field and is perhaps trying to shield the VDV, the paratroopers, where possible, his service. I'm not sure after the Prigozhin affair that anyone in the command in Rostov feels sporty enough to push back on Gerasimov anymore when events go poorly. He has Putin's confidence anyway. There's a reason why some of the mill bloggers seethe about Surovikin being sidelined or exiled, as some did last week on his birthday. Some passed around his picture, said we don't forget their heroes, he is needed on the front, etc., etc. So what does this all mean so far? Troubling because the Russians are throwing vehicles and bodies at Avdiivka at great cost. This is the largest attack since mid-2022. These methods strain the Ukrainians, who are defending well but face large volumes of Russian fires and assaults. Gerasimov made brigades available to Avdiivka or for Avdiivka and other locations. Russians rotated some in the south, suggesting there is a padding in manpower. I don't want to overinterpret availability beyond those 4 to 5 or so brigades yet, 10 to 20,000 depending on staffing levels, without more info. Recent deliveries in artillery munitions from North Korea and Russian domestic production going up this year and next could make Gerasimov feel confident that they can brute force his way through this with shells and sacrificing Storm Z or regular units. Russian advantages in mass are partially undercut by Ukrainian precision fires, cluster munitions and ATACMS use, deep strikes on logistics, prudent planning and better intelligence surveillance reconnaissance. Yet the quantitative imbalance of available artillery shells will not improve in the near term. Gerasimov can look at his spreadsheets and tell himself a true story that he will have artillery advantages in the months ahead and may think he has manpower to spare, but spreadsheets don't fight, as Michael Kaufman says. Russians' losses are high at Avdiivka. Gerasimov and the Russian command are likely to continue to burn resources until he is stopped. also by someone internally. The situation is fluid around Avdiivka. Gerasimov still cannot see what the offensive potential of his force remains deeply degraded. However, the fact that they launched this assault during the Ukrainian counteroffensive suggests they feel confident in their chances. It's important to check assumptions on potentials. I remain concerned about the possibility that the Russians are stockpiling long-range missiles. I think this is true. Large salvos have not been fired for a few months now for future attacks this winter. It is key to stay vigilant for signs of continued personnel regeneration in occupied Ukraine and vehicle availability in rear staging areas. The Russian command may be an incompetent one, but is a very dangerous one nonetheless. I just thought that was a useful analysis to do, just to get us a sense of the losses, but also the potential for more losses going forward, and the strain on Ukrainian resources, given that they appear no one seems to be wanting to stop Gerasimov do this. And also there will be some big salvos of missiles coming. I can feel that in my bones. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. I'll now get on with the second video in the series, so speak soon.